Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hash Rate. I'm going to do kind of an oddball episode today where I'm going to recapitulate and crystallize some of the thinking that's been going on in the Bittensor space on other podcasts like TAO Pod by James Altucher and JJ, and some tweets that I've been seeing coming out of Jacob Steves, otherwise known as Const, one of the founders of Bittensor. So I call this tired capitalism, wired incentivization. So it turns out that you can atomize companies and employees into a series of goals. So you don't really need companies, you don't really need employees, you just need goals. And whoever completes the goals the best gets tokens. So this is exactly what Bitcoin did, right? So Bitcoin incentivized, it doesn't have companies, there's no company, there's no employees, there's just the goal of find the hash of the previous block, right? And confirm the transactions. And whoever does that the best wins the Bitcoin every block, right? So that's the company, right? And the miners are the employees. So it turns out this principle is generally applicable across multiple domains if you create the right blockchain and have the right technology in place and the right incentives in place, right? So if you do this correctly, the world is your temp pool, right? And centralized entities cannot fight the entire world when the entire world is aligned in some fashion. This happened with Linux and the operating system wars. This happened with the internet itself versus the closed online services back in the late 90s. So things like AOL, CompuServe, Prodigy, gone effectively. The internet won by a wide margin. So that's the basic thesis. So when you atomize companies and employees, the laws of physics are kind of different in multiple dimensions. We're going to go over what those things are. But essentially, it's sort of a rethink of how we do everything in capitalism. So, and again, if you think about what Bitcoin did for miners, Uber actually did this to a degree as well, right? The Uber drivers were not Uber employees. They were given goals. They were incentivized, right? It was the same sort of thing, just not in every dimension, but it was definitely edging it in that direction. So in this new universe where you have incentivized miners, only the best and only the fastest get paid, right? And not always, but in a lot of these subnets in the Bittensor universe, that is the case. So it's sort of like it's Highlander, right? There can be only one. And it is that way in Bitcoin, right? Like only one miner wins. The block rewards every block, right? So that's one dynamic. The second dynamic is the workers, the miners, can be anywhere on Earth. You are not geographically constrained in any way, right? So anyone, anywhere on Earth can contribute and compete. And these are gig workers, right? So like all gig workers, if for whatever reason the incentives that you are providing aren't attractive anymore, these miners will very quickly drop out, right? So if the incentives fail, they can leave. So this creates really the competition plus the ability to leave super easily creates evolution and market-driven decisions in both directions, both in the both with the subnet owner, the company owner, if you will, and as well as the worker. Right, they're both evaluating each other continuously. So Jason Calacanis would talk, I think maybe a year and a half ago, about something he called the age of excellence, where he felt that in the workplace, there would basically the drive to compete more and more excellent employees would push the best to the top. And those who weren't excellent would actually not have a place, right? This is that times a million. It's literally the most ferocious implementation of the age of excellence idea. And the results so far of this in the Bittensor universe have been pretty insane, right? So everybody's talking about Ridges. Ridges is a subnet which looks like it is beating centralized companies that do AI-based code generation. And those competitive companies are worth tens of billions of dollars. Ridges is beating them in quality. Now, they haven't released a product yet, so it remains to be seen whether their product will be competitive and better with these centralized entities, but sort of the back-end engine they've built is already superior to the back-end engine of these other companies that are worth tens of billions of dollars. So we'll see if they cross the chasm or not. But it does appear that this method of doing things has the evolution has already produced a superior thing that is probably worth more than other things that are worth tens of billions of dollars. But we'll see. It hasn't done it yet in the market in full. So remains to be seen. There's still some more work to do there. Okay. So now because you have, within the Bittensor universe, TAO, the base token, is needed at all levels to create these competitions and to incentivize the workers, right? So you need TAO to create a subnet. You need TAO staked to validators to create subnet tokens, right? So there are no subnet tokens which represent the value of the subnets unless somebody stakes TAO, and they have to stake it with a particular validator. So there's competition for which validator should you stake your TAO with, right? And you also need, and so basically, and whoever gets the most TAO staked to them as a validator, they earn larger and larger shares of the block rewards as a validator that they get for performing the validating function. So there's competition there, right? And then you need TAO to register as a miner. So and the subnets compete for miners, right? So the miners go where the getting is the best, right? So at every piece of this, there's competition, and everything that happens continuously drives value back into the TAO token. Now, this dynamic is very, very different than what we saw on Ethereum and Solana, because some people have said to me, like, well, we've seen this on Solana and we saw it on Ethereum during the ICO phase, during the DeFi phase. We saw pieces of it, but the value did not accrue back to the base Solana or base Ethereum token in the same way that it does for TAO. And the reason why is because in those universes, you spent Ethereum and you spent Solana to acquire subnet tokens or protocol tokens in those universes. And then that once you spent it, then that Ethereum or Solana would be in the hands of someone else who could then spend it again, right? So it was always in motion. In the TAO universe, everything is driven to stake, right? So you're always staking TAO to create new things or to compete in new ways. As a result, something like 90% of all TAO is staked right now. So it's bricked. It's not liquid. It's not moving. That is a very, 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 very different dynamic than Ethereum, where spent Ethereum and spent Solana is spendable again. It's not locked up, right? So, and we haven't really seen sort of the apotheosis of this part of the design yet, but it does appear that it's going to create insane demand for TAO at some point. Okay, so TAO is based on Bitcoin. The base lesson of Bitcoin is applied generally across multiple domains, multiple projects, multiple subnets. And Stake TAO powers the subnet tokens, as I've said. So that's like the VC investment. So if you want to bet on a subnet, you think a subnet like Ridges is going to, let's just say you think it's going to be worth tens of billions of dollars, not financial advice, I'm not saying it is. But if you think that, at the moment it's worth 60 or 70 million. So you would want to acquire subnet tokens in Ridges, right? And you would have to stake TAO in order to get those subnet tokens, right? So here's another interesting dynamic, is that anyone anywhere on Earth can be a VC in this world, right? Normally in the normal world, only venture capitalists can invest in companies, right? They're the only ones that are given the access. Here, anyone anywhere on Earth can buy TAO and can stake it in a subnet very early on, right? So very different dynamic. Here's the other thing that's really interesting, though, is unlike venture capitalists who, once they park their money somewhere, they don't get it back for 7 to 10 years, no matter what's going on with the company, whether the company's doing well, whether it's not doing well, whether they believe in it still or not. Their money's bricked. They can't get it back, right? They just have to wait for it to play out. Here in subnets, your money's not bricked. You can, you might wake up one morning and decide, you know what, I don't believe in the subnet anymore. You go in, you exchange your subnet tokens, you get your TAO back, and you can then go and invest it in another subnet or just hang on to the TAO, right? So there's constant reevaluation happening at the venture level of all these subnets in TAO. That is very different than regular capitalism, right? Where that constant reevaluation is not going on within the venture-backed world. Not in the same way, not to the same degree, not with the same granularity, and you don't have the participation from anyone anywhere on Earth. It's just VCs who are in Silicon Valley or wherever who have the access. That's a very, very different set of brains and very different dynamics. Here, all brains on Earth are coordinating together to decide which subnets look like the best ones and who are performing the best. Okay, so here's another dynamic which is really interesting. So I've mentioned that there are subnets, which are sort of companies. And then there's miners who are sort of like the workers. They're the ones who produce the product that the subnet then sells to someone, right? Or runs ads against, or whatever they're going to do, however they're going to monetize it. They don't own their workers. The workers are the miners. And as I said, the miners can take off at any time, right? But here's the interesting dynamic. The payment to the miners is not made by the subnet. The subnet does not pay them. The blockchain pays them. And it pays them by printing new tokens. It prints new TAO, which are then converted into subnet tokens. So that just happens under the hood. And the subnet tokens are what are used to pay the miners. And they're newly printed out of thin air, right? So imagine, if the Federal Reserve, just printed new money. In the real world, the Federal Reserve does print new money and hands it to banks. Banks then decide who to loan it to, right? So the Cantillon effect, who benefits the most from newly printed money? Well, whoever gets it the first and is first to spend it gets the most effect of the new money. So here, the new money is printed by the blockchain, handed out to the miners, right? And it's all based on competition, so it's fairly rewarded. It's not like banks just get it, right? Like it's just like a subsidy that they get from the Federal Reserve. This is very different. The person who deserves it the most, the workers, and not just the workers, but the workers who produced the best work the fastest, and in some cases only one worker in every contest gets the newly printed money. This is the most fair distribution of newly printed money ever that we have ever seen anywhere in any system, right? Other than Bitcoin. Kind of amazing. So this newly printed all these newly printed subnet tokens go to the miners. Now, the miners in some cases have to sell those tokens right away, right? To keep funding their ongoing operation. So the question is, what are these subnet tokens? Are these subnet tokens meme coins for the subnet? Like how in fact does value accrue to it, right? And this is the matter of some debate, right? A lot of folks like James Altucher and JJ have been discussing this. I've been talking about this. And so the current thinking kind of goes like this. It's to be determined what they are, right? Like, are they stock? No, they're not. You don't own a company because there is no company. So it is something different, but it does represent the value of the subnet theoretically in some ways. Now, of course, it's got memetic association, but the subnet has a problem though, right? Like the subnet has to make sure that there's continuous value driven into the subnet alpha tokens. So they can support this value creation in several ways. One is they can charge for their product, use that money to buy back their subnet tokens, which companies in the regular stock world do as well. So that's one way. Another way they can continuously drive value into their subnet token is to require it for purchase of their services, right? So just like Saudi Arabia once required the United States dollar in order to buy oil, the oil app, the energy app required the US dollar utility token. So too can subnets require usage of their own token to pay for the commodities that the miners are producing, and that creates demand for that subnet token. So that's another way. The problem of how to support the subnet token is ultimately the problem of the subnet owner. They have to figure that out. And there are multiple ways, there are multiple attempts afoot at this right now. We don't know what the right formula is. But if they fail at this, then their miners regard the value of the token they're receiving as a reward as valueless, and they leave, right? So as the subnets become more and more valuable to keep their workforce happy, they have to figure this problem out, which also creates evolutionary pressure, right? So capitalism, once again, free markets, once again, in action. Now, the model for this, in my mind, the great way to look at this is to look at Bitcoin, right? Once again, Bitcoin has this same exact problem, right? Like, if all these people are out there mining Bitcoin are effectively donating GPU and electricity in giant amounts to mine Bitcoin, they better be pretty damn sure Bitcoin is worth something, right? And will be worth something in the future. And so a lot of these companies, they raised money, right? They became legit companies on their own. They raised money from venture capitalists. that enabled them to mine Bitcoin without selling it immediately, because the idea is, well, today it's worth 100K, but in a couple of years it's going to be worth $1 million. I don't want to sell it now. I want to sell it then, right? So by raising money from venture capitalists, this allows them to have money to fund their operations, to pay for the servers, to pay for the electricity, to pay for the colo facilities, all that stuff without having to sell Bitcoin right away. I think some miners are going to start doing this, right? Because they're going to start seeing that subnet tokens are a bet on the future in the same way Bitcoin once was and still is a bet on the future for, digital gold, right? So if you believe that Ridges is going to come out with a product which is going to compete effectively with Cursor and Claude and all those things, and there's going to be a big switchover that will happen, which it might happen, it might not, we don't know yet. But if it does, oh my God, the Ridges token is going to be worth quite a bit, I think. So, all right. So one of the more interesting things that Elon Musk did in his career is he open sourced the patents for all of his electric car stuff. So Tesla just gave away all the technology that they have, right? And their position was patents aren't really big. It's not really protection. It's innovation is going to continue. And in point of fact, Tesla is going to innovate so fast that even if what our, all of our secrets today, doesn't matter because we're just the best competitors, right? So that is a very Bittensor way to think. So in a similar manner, in the Ridges subnet, the miners are competing to produce the best AI, which writes software, right? That takes the place of software engineers. And once one of the miners wins a contest, how they did that, the source code for that is published. So they don't get to keep their secrets. They come up with the secret sauce and they win one contest, but then they have to publish how they won, right? So all of the other miners can then go look and see how they won and copy that and innovate on top of it, right? So the entire network of miners is continuously getting smarter. If you win a contest, you can't just hoard that secret sauce, right? And just, keep winning contests for days on end. That can't happen. You are forced to publish, which is very similar to what Tesla did in forcing, publishing their patents, right? They sort of did that to themselves, right? So this is one of the reasons why the Ridges subnet is just advancing at this crazy mad pace. The innovation is just like the rate of it is just exponential. So, and I think other subnets are going to follow this model moving forward because the results have been so extreme. So James Altucher said something really interesting in a recent Tao Pod episode. Questions that people were asking him were like, well, we got Facebook, who is reportedly paying $100 million for each engineer, right? Like some of the top engineers. And, how do you compete against that? And his answer was, well, if you're paying $100 million per engineer, that's not scalable, right? That's actually the inverse of what Bittensor is doing, right? There are a lot of really big brains out there that, that aren't inside of OpenAI or Facebook. There are people in India who are just as smart. They just don't have the same access, right? There's people all over the world who are incredibly brilliant. And now that they have AI helping them, they're getting even more brilliant. So you don't want to pay one guy $100 million. You want to basically pay a bunch of people some part of the Bittensor rewards, and you want them to compete for those rewards. That is a much more efficient and better way and much more scalable. And in the end, if you're paying $100 million, you're not going to be able to compete with the entire world, which is paying far less. And remember, the subnets are not directly paying the miners. In this case, the software engineers, right? The chain is subsidizing this stuff. So it's coming, the chain is basically printing new money in order to subsidize all of these subnets. So that is a completely different and new dynamic. Again, if you think about Uber, right, for years, Uber, about half of every ride was subsidized by venture capital money until it got to some scale, right? So, and that went on for about 10 years. So are subsidies bad? Not really. It worked rather well in Uber's case, right? There are many things which are subsidized for some period of time, right? Amazon was not profitable for 17 years. So it was effectively subsidized by venture money and by the public markets until it found its path to profitability, right? So it's not necessarily a terrible thing to be subsidized. Avoid it if you can, but it is one way to be very, very successful. So the Bittensor chain does subsidize by printing new money, right? By printing new tokens. So did Bitcoin. So does Bitcoin today. Bitcoin prints new Bitcoin, and that's how it pays its workers, right? So this can work. And because there's these subsidies at work inside of Bittensor subnets, you have subnets like Shoots and Targon able to offer inference for 1/6 the cost of their competitors. So if you want the cheapest inference on earth, and you get the same stuff, it's not like it's worse. It's exactly the same quality, but you can pay 1/6 by going to Targon or Shoots. And if you look at Open Router, they are typically near the top of the charts over there in terms of the volumes that they're serving up of inference. But if you now, on top of that, if you have subnets using subnets, and each one of those subnets has a similar subsidization going on, thereby creating incredibly reduced prices. So if you start stacking subnets, and let's just say you stack a couple of them that are 1/6 the cost, you use one that's 1/6 for training, you use one that's 1/6 for inference, you use another one that's 1/6 for software engineering. That's 1/6 times 1/6 times 1/6. That is 1/216th the cost, right? By stacking these subnets, you've now reduced your cost by 1/216th, right? That's insane, right? So now we're seeing this happen, right? So Ridges uses Targon and Shoots, and they're claiming that by subnet stacking and other dynamics at play, their cost structure is 1/250th of their nearest competitor, right? So as more subnets come on board, and as subnet stacking occurs, we ought to see this multiplicative cost reduction. I'm calling it the law of subnet stacking, right? Where it just produces lower and lower cost at exponential rates, right? Because subnets using subnets produces this wild new efficiency, it creates sort of a natural keiretsu, right? Other Bittensor subnets will tend to use other Bittensor subnets because they are aware of these cost savings. And when Ridges comes out with their product, because of this effect, because of this subnet stacking effect, the law of subnet stacking, if you will, they're going to be able to massively undercut Cursor and Claude. And assuming their UI is competitive with those products, assuming their user interface and their marketing is somewhat competitive, they ought to steal customers in giant amounts, because I don't think there's any particular loyalty to any tool. The people out there that are building things will go to where the quality is the same, but if the cost is 1/10 or greater, they're going to go there, right? They're completely mercenary. So I think this subnet stacking dynamic, I think, bodes extremely well for the Bittensor universe, and the entire TAO Keiretsu will massively benefit from it. And remember, everything is designed to drive more and more value into the base TAO token, right? Because it's all staking TAO to do all these things, right? So as these subnets become more and more successful over time, it should tend to drive a bunch of value. Like the thing that will accumulate value the surest, if you will, the index fund, should be TAO itself, right? Now, if you bet on the right subnet, you will do orders of magnitude better, right? But that's risky because we don't know which subnets are going to work, right? So you can play that game if you want to, but if you want to play it more safe, theoretically, not financial advice, but theoretically, based on sort of the dynamics here that I'm describing, just betting on the TAO token itself should be pretty interesting. So going back to the question of what is a subnet token? Is it a meme coin for a subnet? For a while, I thought I've been thinking about this a lot, right? Because I'm investing in subnets. I think it's more than a meme coin, but I haven't been able to sort of crystallize the thinking as well as I would like. I think that James Altucher and some of these other guys are crystallizing it better. And James brought up something very interesting, right? We were comparing. I've been thinking about this, and I've been saying, well, back in the olden days, back in the twirly mustache times, you owned stocks because you got dividends on your railroads, right? Like that was why you owned stocks. When you own a stock today, you don't really, nobody's really doing dividends anymore. So that whole thing has kind of gone away. you own Tesla because you like Elon and you think that Tesla, the company, is going to continue to innovate, and it's going to make more and more money, but you're not getting any of that money. You don't get dividends, right? Owning stock, it basically is a meme coin for a company. Really, it's kind of disconnected from the internals of the actual company, right? The fundamentals. There's no direct connection. James brought up something interesting, though. He's like, well, it's not totally like that. It's not like Tesla is not totally a meme coin. Tesla stock is not totally a meme coin for Tesla, the company, because part of the company laws prevent Tesla, the company, from giving away its IP, which I guess it sort of did do with giving, open sourcing its patents, right? So maybe it didn't totally prevent that. But there are some protections, right? Like they can't just, Elon can't just take the intellectual property of the company and run away down the road with it. It's got to stay within Tesla, the company, right? There are protections in place for that sort of thing. So do validators have that same protection? And the answer is no. There is not like a legal framework around them. However, remember, the validators don't own their miners. The miners are not like their property. The miners are just there on a block by block basis, competing for new emissions from the chain because they deem that what you're doing will be valuable down the road. They're betting on you, right? They're betting that the subnet tokens are going to become more and more valuable over time. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but it's exactly like Bitcoin miners. Bitcoin miners bet that Bitcoins would be very valuable down the road. And they were right? And they look like they're going to continue to be right for the foreseeable future. So, if you think Ridges is going to become a lot more valuable down the road, you are inclined to try to compete and mine Ridges tokens, right? And if you are an AI expert, this is something that's very attractive to you. You could actually, in the early days of Ridges, stack a lot of Ridges tokens on the cheap, right? Like it's like mining Bitcoin back in 2011, right? Extremely, if you did that, you are sitting on a giant pile of a lot of wealth right now. So that kind of speculation, and that's exactly why VCs are startup speculators. Like it's no different, right? They invest money in startups that they think are going to become the next Google or the next Facebook or whatever, right? So it's just sort of democratizing it down to the worker who has the talent. Those are the people who are able to make these bets, right? Which maybe those are the better people to be making these bets, right, than the VCs. The people who are in the trenches, the people who understand it the deepest and the most. I think we're going to see more and more of that. Like talent is going to be attracted to this universe. It's just going to bring the best and the brightest in the fastest, I think. So to make this video, I got to say, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, right? I'm standing on JJ's shoulders. I'm standing on James Altucher's shoulders. I'm standing on Jacob Steve's shoulders. I'm standing on Ridge's shoulders. And I'm sure there's other people in here that I'm forgetting. And I apologize. I've just been inhaling and reading a lot of stuff. And I wanted to create this episode while these dynamics were fresh in my mind. This is not capitalism. This is a new thing. This is incentivism, I think, right? Like it's an innovation on capitalism itself. And JJ's been saying this a lot, and it sounds sort of crazy, but I don't think it is. I think that it's a fundamental alteration of the laws of physics. It takes capitalism and it makes it hyper efficient. It's like capitalism squared. It's the age of excellence squared. It is the purest form of incentive alignment ever, I think. So this Bittensor TAO dynamic is something unlike anything we've seen. It takes bits and pieces of Bitcoin, a little bit from Ethereum and those things, some things from capitalism, but it has fundamentally invented a new engine and a new way of doing companies, a new way of doing workers, a new way of doing everything. Every sort of economic activity is sort of reinvented here. So obviously I'm pretty bullish on all of this, and continue to study it, and I will continue to post my thoughts as these things start crystallizing. We're all trying to figure out what we're seeing here, and it does change from week to week. It's a highly in motion thing. It's a highly dynamic thing. So we're all just sort of bouncing these ideas off one another. But I think we're in an extremely interesting world. It's as interesting as Bitcoin was in the early days. It's as interesting as the internet was in its early days. And I think that's why it's attracted a lot of the same minds. So this has been Hash Rate. My name is Mark Jeffrey. We'll see you all next time.